This was also a trend a couple of years ago. I haven't seen it as often, but I do want to bring it up because I want to get it out there that this is bad advice and you should not do it. 95% of the time when I send a pass on a query, it's because it's
Laurie Dennison is a literary advocate and associate agent at Creative Media Agency, where she also serves as the internship coordinator. CMA has been instrumental in launching the careers of best-selling authors and selling millions of books worldwide. With over a decade of experience in editing and writing, Laurie brings a keen editorial eye and a deep understanding of story to her role as an agent. She is a fierce custodian of her authors' careers, championing works that not only entertain, but also resonate deeply with readers. In the interview that I'll be sharing with you today, Laurie breaks down what lit agents actually do, why she is most likely to pass on a submission, as well as the pros and cons of traditional versus self-publishing. I learned so much from our time together. If there's two things that come to the top of my mind right now, it's some of the bad advice that she highlighted, which is currently on the internet. And another thing I really enjoyed was how she painted a picture of what the process is likely to look like from once you're assigned as a debut author to the point where your book actually gets published. So if this sounds interesting to you, consider giving this video a like. And with that out of the way, I'd like you to grab a beverage, sit down and relax, and let me introduce you to Laurie.
Laurie, tell me, how does one even get into the world of becoming a lit agent? And from your experience, what have been some of the takeaways with regards to what you hoped this world would look like in comparison to what is required from you? Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like publishing in general, years ago, you didn't have like a major in college that was related to publishing. So people may like major in English or communications or maybe business or psychology. And people who love books would just kind of come to the publishing industry. And I think that was kind of the start of this being a very internship-based industry. So across the field, whether you're in like editorial at a publishing house or you're working as a literary agent, most people get started in the industry with internships. And that's kind of the expectation, is that you'll do a couple of internships, you'll learn, kind of find out what role you're looking for in the industry. So internships are very common in agenting, but also across all of publishing. I will say now there are more publishing programs and majors in the past decade. There have been several new master's programs and even undergrad programs where you can actually major in publishing, but that's not necessary. That's kind of a newer development. There are also some great grad programs that are for the summer only. So post-grad, like you can get like 6 hours of credit. The University of Denver has one. It's called the Denver Publishing Institute. Columbia has a program and NYU has a program. There are probably way more than that, but those are kind of the oldest and the biggest. So I would say those two methods of people kind of starting with internships and kind of finding out that they want to get into agenting, or some people choose to go through these summer programs or a major. All that being said, agenting in particular is very apprenticeship. So like you kind of work with another agent and kind of learn the ropes that way. So that's definitely was the path for me. I did go to the Denver Publishing Institute, but ultimately I started as an intern myself and worked my way up from being an intern into an associate agent. I think the biggest takeaway for me is about subjectivity. So when you're on the other side of this, you might hear an agent say over and over and over, like, it's subjective, it's not personal, it's not, this is just not my taste. That is so, so true. And I think it's really hard unless you've been on this side of it to really understand that. So I read pitches every day that are great. I would say like 95% of the time when I send a pass on a query, it's not because the writing isn't good or because the pitch isn't interesting. It's just because it's not the best fit for me and my personal taste, or it doesn't kind of fit with my editor contacts and then the imprints that I'm familiar with. So really, really is a subjective business. And I don't think anyone should ever take a pass on a query as like some kind of value judgment, because it's not. It's really just about finding that right fit. I've got a question on fit that I'll ask you a little bit later. But before we get there, can you tell me about some of your highlights of being a lit agent, or some of the highlights you've had working with a team of lit agents? Yeah, well, I have to say, I love my job and I love that every day I get to talk about books with my colleagues, with my clients, with editors. I love that. And that's just a joy of every day that we get to talk about books and to be a part of getting books out into the world. So I love that. But I think probably the biggest highlights have been being able to call my clients and tell them that they have an offer. So that's been really special to be able to just give them a little text and say, can you jump on a call today? I think they hopefully knew what was coming. Those are really been highlights for me to be able to say to an author, hey, we have an offer. This is going to happen. At what point should a debut author reach out to a lit agent when it comes to submitting their manuscript? So I think that it kind of depends on what you're writing. If we are talking about fiction, definitely the manuscript should be complete. It should be edited, whether that's self-edited, whether you've had beta readers and you've done revisions. With any fiction manuscript, you want it to be the absolute best it can be, and you're like ready. You've done all that you can do with it before you reach out to an agent. So that's kind of the expectation from our end. With memoir, which sits in this interesting space in the middle, it is nonfiction, but it also has this narrative arc. So both the full memoir needs to be complete, but you also need a full proposal for a nonfiction project. So I think that's something I know there have been times when I've requested the proposal from memoir writers and they had to work on it because they didn't have it. You want to have both of those things as soon as you're like, when you're ready to query, you need both of those for memoir. And then in nonfiction, that's different. So in nonfiction, that's more like prescriptive. You need the full proposal complete. That should include a market analysis, comparable titles. You need an outline, like a chapter by chapter outline, and at least 2 sample chapters, maybe 3 written. And so often with prescriptive nonfiction, we're selling the proposal, not the complete manuscript, because the author will work with the editor on completing that manuscript. So yeah, for nonfiction, you need that full proposal with at least 2 sample chapters before you start reaching out. So when you were talking about a memoir just now, you said you need the full proposal. Are you also selling a proposal like with other nonfiction? So it is both. When I submit a memoir to an editor, I have to provide them with both the full manuscript and that full proposal. And so that's kind of why I need to have that idea. When I'm talking about proposals, I do work with the client after I've signed them. So the proposal that an author sends to me is not necessarily the same proposal that I send to an editor, but we work very closely on revising that and making sure it kind of fits the industry standard for whatever the genre of the book is. So when I send a memoir to an editor, I have to have the full proposal and the full complete manuscript. Just a fun question about editing. So I read a quote the other day that said, I think the 8th draft of writing something is the draft you should submit. How many times do you think somebody needs to revise and edit something before they actually submit it? That's a great question. I mean, I would never put a number like that on it because I feel like everyone's process is different, right? Some people plan like your plotters, if you're talking about fiction, like plan well in advance. Some people edit a single chapter or a single scene like as they're going along. So I feel like I wouldn't put a specific number on it, but I would say when an author gets to the point that they feel like they're only making like tiny minor changes, like I'm changing the wording here, or maybe I cut something like out here, but the main content is not changing anymore. Like you've done everything with the plot and the characters, or, you know, the narrative structure that you can do, and you're just making like little tiny changes. I feel like that's the point that it's ready to go. I do think it's very helpful to have beta readers and critique partners to kind of get some outside feedback and have someone else tell you if they also think it's ready to go. I mean, ultimately, the author has to make that decision. But yeah, I do think having at least a couple of outside pairs of eyes can be helpful, especially readers who read the genre that you're writing in. So if it's memoir, you know, you want someone who's reading published memoirs to kind of give you that feedback. Does this feel like it's ready to go? So if you had to give me 3 do's and 3 don'ts for just basic submissions for people wanting to submit, mostly, I think, fiction, what would those be? Okay, yes. So I can definitely do that. I'll start with the do's. So definitely do
research the agent's wish list before you submit. Like, what do I mean? How detailed? Well, the most important thing here is to make sure you're submitting a genre that that agent represents. So just for instance, I don't represent picture books. Sometimes people send me picture books. That's just going to be an automatic no for me because that's not something that I represent. And that's a lot of time and effort on that author's part to put together a query and send it in. So, checking first to make sure that the genre that you're writing matches with the literary agents that you're sending to. That's like the first. Definitely do that every time. Even though I know it takes a lot of time to do research, I'm not saying like find out about all their personal history. I'm just saying make sure that your genre matches with what they represent. Another do follow the agent's suggested guidelines and submission instructions. So, for instance, I ask for 10 pages in a query. I also ask for comparable titles for fiction. Every different agent is different. We're all individuals. We all have our different preferences. And I know that can be time consuming to try to put together. This agent wants 5 pages. This agent wants 10 pages. This agent wants 30 pages. We all have a reason for why we do it the way we do. And as time consuming as that can be, that's a great first step in a business relationship, right? That you've shown that you've paid attention to what those guidelines are and you're following those guidelines. So I think definitely do that. It's there for a reason. It makes the process better for all of us. And then I would say the last do is more general, not about the agent side, but the author side. I think a lot of people make goals like my goal this year is to sign with a literary agent. And that's a wonderful goal to have. It's a great goal to have. It is a goal that is not 100% in your control. I am a big proponent of goals that you can control and goals that are attainable for yourself. So while your big goal may be to sign with an agent, I think it's really helpful to make small goals like I am going to research 10 agents today. I am going to send 10 queries today, kind of celebrating those small achievements and making sure that they are things you can do will help you get to that big goal. There's so much that plays into this, the industry, timing, finding the right match. So you may not always be able to achieve that goal. Like this year, I'm going to sign with an agent, but you can control those other smaller goals. Like I'm going to write 1,000 words today. So I do encourage writers to do that so that you're retaining some of that control. Now, for the things you should not do, this is going to seem obvious, but my first big one is don't lie. That, again, it may seem like it's obvious, but it happens a lot. So for instance, if someone tells me that they were referred to me by another agent, specifically a colleague at Creative Media Agency, the first thing I'm going to do is ask my co-agent, like, hey, you referred this person to me. What did you think of it? Like probably even before I read the manuscript. And so it happens so often that I'll ask my colleague and be like, I don't know that person and I did not refer them to you. So we do talk to each other. So even if you may think that saying you have a referral will help you, if you don't actually have a referral, it's actually worse to say that. That's just one example. This was also a trend a couple of years ago. I haven't seen it as often, but I do want to bring it up because I want to get it out there that this is bad advice and you should not do it. A couple of years ago, there was someone who had queried, and I think this person queried me first, and then like 2 or 3 days later said, hey, I have an offer of representation. I need your answer in 2 weeks. And so I ended up passing on that project. And then 2 weeks later, this person proceeded to query every agent at our agency in like 2-week intervals. And the author was saying, I have an offer from someone else. I need your response. And then we would respond, whichever agent would respond. And then 2 weeks later, that author would then query another agent at our agency and again say, well, I have an offer. I need your response. So again, it's like this advice that was happening a lot for a period of time. And I think there might have been some advice out on the internet that said, hey, if you want to speed up your responses, tell an agent that you have an offer and they'll get back to you faster. But again, like we do talk to each other. So if you're not being honest, that's probably going to come back to bite you in the end. So I would say don't don't lie, whether it's about a referral or if you have an offer or, whatever else out there. If you say you met me at a conference, that just happened the other day. Someone said they met me at a conference where I wasn't in attendance. So again, just tell the truth. That's the first one. My next don't respond to a pass on a partial or a full in a negative way. And so when an agent has read a partial or a full and they send a pass letter, I know that sometimes you want more feedback, or sometimes it's upsetting. Obviously, it's your dream. It's upsetting to get a rejection. But, and if an agent has asked for you to respond and said, hey, I'm open to taking another look at this if you want to revise, that is an invitation to respond, right? If you don't have a clear invitation to respond, you should not respond to that rejection, and you definitely should not respond in a negative way. It's just burning a bridge if you respond with a nasty, angry note to a rejection, and then you decide to query someone else at my agency down the road. I might still remember that, so it's just not a good idea to respond negatively. Again, it's a business relationship, so you want to start off the right foot. And then my last don't. This is just a nitpicky one for me. Okay, this is not a big one, don't lie. This is just a personal thing for me. It is not necessary to quote an agent's wish list back to them. I would say more than 50% of the queries I get, the author has taken a line or two from my bio or my wish list and they've included it in the query letter. I won't hold that against you if you do it. Again, I would say at least half my queries have that in it. It's just not necessary. I know what's on my wish list, and you have so little time and space in a query letter. So I just feel like it's not the best use of space in a query letter to quote back the wish list. Instead, spend that line talking about your book and what's good about your book or what's different about your book, instead of this is not necessary to do that.
I would be the person that would have done that, because I would have wanted you to know, hey, I've actually done the work. Look, yes. I'm so glad I've heard that, because you're so right. There is only such a short amount of space and time. You don't really want to see that. Wow, thank you.
Like I said, I don't hold it against anyone, because I understand that is the motivation, right? To show, I've read your wish list. I know what you're looking for. So I totally understand, and I wouldn't hold it against anyone. It's one of those things. It's just not necessary for you to do, and you can use that space for someone else.
Okay, so now please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm still getting my head around this whole world. But from what I have seen so far, it seems like there are a similar set of criteria that debut authors go through when it comes to submitting their work to lit agents. So it seems like there's, information about the book, and then it's the sample chapters. So would you please walk me through the process of what happens when you actually read sample chapters that you connect?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about we have the processes and the way that each agent, even though it's different from agent to agent, we all have this process in place that's a part of our process of deciding, is this something that we could represent? So for me, I ask for 10 pages to start with, and I'll read those 10 pages and I'll read the pitch. And if I'm on the fence, I may sit on it for a little bit and come back to it. I may read that query and those 10 pages 3 or 4 times before I make a decision sometimes. And that's because I'm constantly having to budget my time. And that's true for all of the agents. So part of this is making sure that we feel really strongly about something before we request to see more. The next step for me, I ask for 50 pages and a synopsis next. And so that's different for different agents, but it's usually some form of partial manuscript, so it's not the whole thing. But I ask for the synopsis at that point because I want to get a sense of the pacing and the characters in those first 50 pages. And then I want to kind of see that narrative arc over the whole story before I make a decision about the full. Again, this comes down to time, right? So when I read that partial and I read the synopsis, I will often sit on that for a week or 2 weeks or more. Sometimes if I'm super hungry and excited, I'll just go ahead and request the full right away. But I'm sitting on it because I'm thinking about it. I'm like, how often am I thinking about it? Do I want to come back to this? Am I excited to still read this a week later or 2 weeks later? Am I thinking through these elements of the plot? And is this something that I'm, again, like excited and I can imagine where I could send this to and what editors and imprints it would fit well with? So like we do have these purposeful breaks in the timeline when we're requesting. So then the next step after that, I'm like, okay, I really think this has a lot of potential. The next step would be to request the full manuscript. And so then at that point, again, it may take me time because all agents, we have to focus on our existing clients first. So whatever's going on with our existing clients may make it take longer before we can read a full manuscript from a potential new client. So that may take a couple of months, but ultimately, if I've read the full manuscript and I've just fallen in love with it, I have an idea of what I think the vision is, I know who I could sell it to. My next step would be to schedule a phone call. So for me, I would always schedule a phone call and talk to the author or a video call before offering because I want to get a sense of how well we would work together and if our visions are the same. Because I would say we're very editorial at CMA, and I've never seen any project go out, even existing clients, that hasn't been through at least one round of revision. Usually it's more. So I always want to talk to an author and kind of get a sense of what would they not be willing to change? What are the issues that they understand and know might be there? Like what's really resonating with them and my feedback. And then ultimately it's our vision for how this would sit in the market the same. And then also what is their vision for their career? Like what do you want to write next? These are all things. Is this something that I represent? So yeah, that would be the next step, the phone call. And then at the end of that phone call, if I think like we're on the same page, then I would generally offer representation on the call. Sometimes it might come a little later, but that's generally the process. Of course, I'm always happy if someone's ready to accept right away. And I think all agents should be willing to give you some time to make that decision. So at least a couple of weeks to think it through, let any other agents out there know that you have an offer on the table. So always happy to give time.
What are your thoughts regarding a debut author reaching out and working with an agent who perhaps has a smaller list of clients versus working with an agent who has been around for many years, but who might at this point have a lot of clients?
That's a great question and something I think it's really important to think through. So I think there are benefits and drawbacks to both. And again, I think it's a good idea to kind of mix up who you're querying depending on your comfort level. So obviously the benefits of an established agent with a long career and a bigger client list. Obviously that agent has been doing this for a long time. They have a sales track record. You can see like who they've sold projects to, and you can see who their clients are in their careers. You definitely know with an established agent that they know what they're doing. They have the experience, they have the contacts. So definitely a lot of benefits there. You also know that they are going to be able to get your work out to the editors. The drawback to a really established agent with a big client list is that agent doesn't have as much time to spend with each individual client. So if an agent has 30 or 50 or more clients, when you think about how many manuscripts that is in a year and the amount of time that they have like working through all these projects, their time to spend with a new debut author is just a little bit less because their time is divided with all these other clients. I would say another thing too, response time might be a little slower because of that. So you might have to wait a month or multiple months to get feedback on a manuscript. There are definite benefits with all that experience and the contacts, but the drawbacks can be like communication might be a little slower. You just might not have as much personal time and attention. On the other side, a newer agent is someone who does have more time, because if you have a smaller client list, then you have more time to devote to each individual client. Those agents are more likely to take something on that needs a little more work to get ready to go out on submission because they have the time to spend. Communication is typically faster with a newer agent. So, I think there are definite benefits to a newer agent. Of course, the drawbacks are they don't have a lot of sales track record. You don't really know. You can't be as confident in their contacts. So my suggestion for that, when you're looking at newer agents, look for newer agents who are at established, reputable agencies and have some form of mentorship. because then that way, like, at least you know that they've got the contacts through their mentor. I would only say be wary of like a single person who just started being a literary agent and doesn't have any track record and hasn't worked at another agency before, because they may not have that experience in the contacts. But when you're looking at those newer agents, I'd say if they're working at an established agency with some kind of mentorship program, they're probably a good option because they may be more willing to take someone on who's newer, who might need a little more.
All right. So now we've got the perfect fit of agent and debut author. Please, can you walk me through the process of after a debut author is signed to when the author's book could potentially be published?
Yes. So let's say we have the offer has been made, the offer has been accepted. So the next step for me, and again, many agents would be this way, everyone at CMA, we always go through revisions before we send something out. So the next step would be I would write up an edit letter, and then I would talk through that edit letter with my client. So I like to adjust my communication style to whatever works for different clients. But they'll always be a letter, and there'll always be an option for a phone call or a video call to kind of discuss. And so my goal is always to make sure that our visions are the same, that we're aligned, and that I'm helping an author make their book into what they want it to be, the best version of it. So to me, that's a conversation. Like, I don't write an edit letter and say, you must do this, this, and this. This is more like a collaboration. Like, I want to make sure we're executing what the author wants to execute. And so then we'll set a timeline. Some people revise faster than others. Some manuscripts take more work than others. So we'll set that timeline. I'll check in, and then we'll read the revision when it's done. There may be that we need another round of revision. We might need some line edits, or maybe not. Line edits are not something that a ton of agents do, but some do. And so then once we feel like it's ready to go out, from the agent's perspective, we start to make a submission list. So we're going through and deciding like which imprints do we want to send to, which editors do we want to target at those imprints. At that point, I usually ask for more information from the author. So I'll want like an updated bio, if there have been any new publishing credits, anything related to platform, anything I can use to kind of help sell that author to the editor. And so then when we go on submission, there are a couple of different approaches. So one approach is to just go out to kind of a smaller list, a more targeted list of editors and imprints, and start with that first round that way. And, hopefully, you've been very specific in that very targeted list, and hopefully an offer comes from that list. This process may take a couple of weeks. It may take months. That first round can take 3 months, 4 months, even up to 6 months. After the pandemic, I feel like response times really slowed to where you could have a project be on sub for a year in multiple rounds or even longer, and it could still end up selling. So response times have gotten better now that we're several years post like the worst of the pandemic, but it can still take several months. So depending on, if an offer comes, great, then we start negotiating that offer. If the offer doesn't come, maybe we got some feedback in that first round that you might be able to take and incorporate that feedback before you send it to another batch of editors. So that's kind of a reason for starting with a smaller list if you want to kind of see that response first. Another option is to just go wide to basically any editor that you think and any imprint would be a good fit for this all in that first round, and just do it all in one round without kind of having that pause and opportunity for feedback and revision. So then at that point, when an offer comes, I would let the author know, and then I'd negotiate that contract. And then once everything's signed and we're ready to move forward, that's when the agent becomes more the advocate for the client. So, I'm involved as much as I need to be. I'm kind of the liaison for business related things, kind of making sure that the editor, the imprint's doing everything that they're supposed to do, just being that advocate and liaison for the client. And how much I'm involved in editorial at that point is kind of different from client to client. If everything's going smoothly, then they would typically just be moving forward with their editor in-house at that point. Then, the next things you are kind of coordinating marketing and promotion with the imprint. That's, again, like we're just doing the coordinating and kind of helping behind the scenes at that point and kind of letting them run with it. Other things at that point, depending on what rights we have, we might also be shopping foreign rights or film and TV. If we retain audio, like we might be trying to sell those rights at that point too, after something's been sold, but before it's come out. So those may be other things that we're kind of working on behind the scenes. Hopefully the author's also working on the next project, so we're getting ready to send that out.
There's a lot that goes on there. You mentioned editing. I'm just curious, just from my experience dealing with editing now, it can be quite a costly process. Is that a process that the debut author takes on, or is that a cost that the agency covers? How does editing work before it's sent to the publisher?
So what we do, when I say that we're editorial at CMA, I'm referring to us, the agent. So we do not ask for our clients to get outside paid editing. That's part of like what we do in our jobs at CMA. Again, that's different from agency to agency. If an agent says we are editorial, that's generally what they mean, that like we're going to help you with the revisions. And if an agency is not editorial, it typically means that they don't do a lot of that in-house, but they may suggest someone that you could go to outside. But yeah, for us, that's that process of that revision. Like once you've signed with me, you're revising with me until you get to the editor in-house of the publisher.
Self-publishing seems to be very trendy on the internet at the moment. Who do you think self-publishing is for, and who do you think would benefit the traditional route of publishing?
I think sometimes people see it as a divide, but what I would say is that both avenues are completely valid, and they, again, both have benefits and drawbacks, right? So I'll start with traditional publishing and what I think are the benefits and the drawbacks, and then kind of talk about how self-publishing is different, and that I think it's really dependent on your goals as an author. But so in traditional publishing, the main benefit is that the money flows to the author, right? So when you sign a contract, you would typically get an advance, and then you would get royalties when the book sells. So all of the investment of money and time that goes into cover design and editing and layout and marketing and promotion and getting books sales out into bookstores, all of those things are done by the traditional publisher. And, and the author doesn't pay for any of that. That's all the publisher's job to do. So, that's obviously one of the main benefits of a traditional publisher. They also have the ability to get books into bookstores and to kind of sell into more places, to sell into libraries. It's because they have those kind of established frameworks. I think it's easier for them to do that. So, if that's your goal, to walk into the bookstore and see your book there, that's one of the things that traditional publishing is a great avenue for them. What are some of the drawbacks of traditional publishing? Well, for one, it's slow. It's a very slow process. It takes months to query and sign with an agent. It takes months to go on submission. Once a book is acquired, it takes months up to years before it actually is published after acquisition. So, it's a very slow process. The other thing I think that can be a drawback is the other side of having the publisher do all those things for you is that you have to relinquish a little bit of control. So an author may not have the final say in what the final title of a book is. They may be able to give feedback on a cover design, but ultimately the publisher is the one who gets to choose the cover design and what goes out. So in all of the marketing and promotion, again, the publisher is the one in control. So it's really a collaborative effort, and a lot of people's hands are involved in getting a book to the market. On the flip side, for self-publishing, I think the main benefit is that you retain all of that control. You get to choose your title, and you get to choose your cover design and how the layout looks like. And if you really love this side character, you can keep them. These are all of these things. It's up to you. You retain all of that control. So I think that's definitely a benefit. It can be much faster, obviously, because you retain control, the speed of how, you go from a manuscript being finished to being published. When you're self-publishing, that's completely dependent on you and how fast you can take care of all those things. So definitely benefits. Obviously, you're also making more money on sales because you're not like splitting and just getting royalties. So you can make more money off sales. But one of the drawbacks is that you have to pay for all of those things yourself out of pocket. So it's this initial investment. So if you end up having to pay for a developmental editor, if you had to pay for a cover designer, if you had to pay for somebody to do layout, marketing, promotion, you could end up putting a lot of money in upfront and not really knowing for sure if you're going to make that back in sales. So, I think there's a little bit of a risk element there. So, yeah, I think there are benefits and drawbacks to both. But I think the biggest thing is if you want to retain that control, I think it's just important to know what you're getting into and to know that you do have to think about the marketing and the promotion and how are you going to get the book out there and how are you going to make sales. People who are great at writing and great at all these other things and project management can really, really excel. Obviously, it's been done. There are people just doing really, really well with self-publishing, and you definitely can. I think it's just important to know what you're getting into and like know all these different roles that you have to fill. But if you want to retain that control, I think it's a really valid path, and you can be really successful with it. Now, I'm going to add one more thing here. So something that I've seen recently is I've seen people querying who have just self-published and then they're querying right after self-publishing. So like just like last month, an author might have published on Amazon and then the next month they're sending query letters out. I'm a little confused by it. I'm not sure what the thought process behind it is. I will say, obviously, there have been very successful self-published authors who have been picked up by major publishing houses. Colleen Hoover's probably the most famous example at the moment. But I think it's important to understand those self-published authors who get picked up by the big publishing houses have huge, huge sales and success. And so if you self-published your book and you've only sold like 10 copies or even like 100 copies, maybe even 500 copies, like that to a publisher, those are not huge sales numbers. And they're looking at it like, well, if it didn't sell before, why would we take it on now? It's already been published. And so, that can be a roadblock. If someone has been very successful with self-publishing, that can be a help when you're trying to move over into traditional publishing. But if you have, like my point, going back to someone who had just self-published like the month before, you couldn't possibly even have enough sales numbers to show that, oh, this is going to be big. And I think a traditional publisher should take it on. So my suggestion to people who are on the fence about which way to go would be to try querying in the traditional space first, if you would want to do that. And then if you can't find a good fit, you can always go the self-publishing route after. But yeah, I would suggest if you're on the fence that you try querying in the traditional way first because it can be a roadblock to us if something's already been self-published and then we're trying to sell it and it doesn't have great sales.
So we're going to wrap up this interview and I'm going to ask you to share books that have made you smile or that have moved you that you would love everybody to read.
Some of these aren't the newest, but they are the ones that have really stuck with me. I will talk about Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed forever and ever. It's amazing. And I still think about it all the time. I absolutely love that one. Highly recommend. Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. Again, that one's several years old, but I still think about it a lot. It's really an amazing, amazing book and so deep and twisty and definitely really grabbed me. I still think about it. Books that make me smile. Sonia Hartle is a romance author who's absolutely fantastic. Rent to Be was her last one that just made me laugh and smile. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. Amy Leah, The Catch was the last in the Influencer series. That's another romance that I thought was a lot of fun. Yeah, I will say yours truly, the romance too, that was one that kind of was both.
This one?
Yes, although that's not what my cover looks like, but yes. I'll tell you what I love about that one because I think it's both got the fun romance part of it, but I really love that there was something deeper going on and the representation of an autoimmune disorder in the way that it was presented there. I think that's really moved me too. It was like a really beautiful balance of being both moving and kind of fun and thought it touched on some deeper themes. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
A huge thank you to Laurie for taking out the time to demystify this world for me. I anticipated that there would be a learning curve when I set out on this journey to write a book, but I could have never imagined how complex the world of traditional publishing could be. And so it's so nice to know that agents like Laurie and the team at CMA exist who really champion their author and the author's work. So yeah, I really appreciate your time, Laurie. Thank you. It's not lost on me at all. And if you're a viewer who stumbled across this video and you still have more burning questions when it comes to the world of traditional publishing, drop them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get you an answer. And if you found this video valuable, consider giving it a thumbs up. I will make sure to leave a playlist for you in the end screen that I think you'll enjoy as well. I'll see you in one of my next videos. Take care, guys. Bye.